Hello and welcome. You're watching UATV News with me, Ksenia Buhai. The Kremlin propaganda should be stopped due to the sanctions imposed on MP Taras Kozak. The TV channels 112 Ukraine, Zik and News 1 stopped broadcasting in Ukraine. Violations on their part were repeatedly noted by the National Council on Television and Radio Broadcasting. Besides, the Security Service of Ukraine states it had the evidence that Russia finances those channels. Our journalists have details.
Manipulative propaganda should receive a harsh reaction. This is how the president of Ukraine commented on the decision on sanctions. Sanctions is a difficult decision. Ukraine strongly supports freedom of speech, not propaganda financed by the aggressor country that undermines Ukraine on its way to EU and Euro-Atlantic integration. Fight for independence is fight in the information war for truth and European values. Earlier, Volodymyr Zelensky signed a decree on the entry into force of the National Security and Defense Council decision on personal and economic sanctions against MP Taras Kozak and associated legal entities for a period of 5 years. Ukrainian TV channels 112 Ukraine, Zik and News 1 came under the restrictions. Their broadcasting is blocked. Among 19 members of the National Security and Defense Council, 17 voted for the decision. One member of the National Security and Defense Council abstained, and one is on a business trip. The decision was made, the relevant decree is posted on the president's website. The president's office notes that the decision was legal and reasonable. This decision of the National Security Council was based on evidence of the existence of a threat to the national security and defense of the country gathered by the Security Service of Ukraine. In the future, all these materials gathered by the Security Service will be evaluated by a court in a trial. The reason for this was indisputable evidence and the proof that those TV channels have been funded by the aggressor state for a long time. Accordingly, the state could not fail to act in conditions when the aggression intensifies, when Crimea remains occupied, when Ukrainian soldiers continue dying in the occupied Donbass. The Security Service of Ukraine confirms that they are investigating people and companies that have come under the sanctions. There is a hybrid war waged against Ukraine, including in the information sphere. We should systematically counteract it in order to protect the interests of the state. The Ministry of Internal Affairs, as a body of power, which is also responsible for the internal security of the state, will clearly and lawfully implement the decision of the National Security and Defense Council, the decree of the President of Ukraine, and protect the interests of Ukrainian citizens. The National Council of Ukraine on Television and Radio Broadcasting has also for a long time fixed violations by television channels that have come under sanctions.
Over the past year, TV channel 112 received 6 warnings, TV channel Zik received 5. As for the News 1, for more than a year there is a case in court to terminate their license. It is in connection with serious violations of the law on television and radio broadcasting. I'm talking about the language of violence, about issues that are treated as cause for violence, about contempt.
Sanctions against Taras Kozak and his TV channels became a hot topic at the plenary meeting of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. Members of the faction Opposition Platform for Life blocked the parliamentary stand in order to speak out against such a decision. Remember, you will not shut our mouth, neither of our party nor of millions of our voters. Remember, you will not shut us up with murders, channel bans, terror. The Servant of the People faction considers the National Security Council's decision as justified. These sanctions are imposed for systematic disinformation towards Ukraine, Ukrainian society, Ukrainian politicians, distortion of information. According to head of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Humanitarian Information Policy Mikita Poturaev, restricting the work of channels is just one step in the fight against anti-Ukrainian forces controlled by the Kremlin. Actually, this decision is not about channels. This is a decision about people who, under the guise of Ukrainian legislation, using Ukrainian passports, are in fact the conductors of the Russian anti-Ukrainian policy in Ukraine and do business here. Moreover, they conduct business both with Russia and with terrorist groups. The Ministry of Culture and Information Policy will ask YouTube to close the pages of the channels 112 Ukraine, Zik and News 1. The ministry plans to send the decision of the National Security and Defense Council to the management of the video hosting. Those channels in air, satellite or internet broadcast pose an information threat to Ukraine's national security, as they are not the media or a normal broadcaster, but part of the Russian propaganda machine against Ukraine. The decision to impose sanctions was supported by the United States of America. This information is confirmed by the US Embassy in Ukraine. The decision was also positively assessed by the European Union. This was informed by head of the Ukrainian delegation to the EU. Reported by Vadim Kramer, Yulia Krychkova and Artem Holub, UATV News.
After the occupation of the Crimean Peninsula, the Russian Black Sea Fleet has to become the property of Ukraine. This is foreseen by the draft law on the state policy of the transition period, prepared by the Ministry of Reintegration. In an interview to one of the Kyiv's media, Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Minister for Reintegration of the Temporarily Occupied Territories, Oleksiy Reznikov, stated that the so-called Kharkiv agreements on the stationing of the Russian Black Sea Fleet are null and void since Russia has broken all its commitments.
We for ourselves find those agreements waste. Furthermore, the occupant himself has violated everything that could be violated in these agreements, as well as the Umbrella Friendship Treaty, which we withdrew from. Article 17 of the Constitution clearly states that foreign military bases cannot be deployed on Ukraine's territory. Beforehand, there was an exception for the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation set in the transitional provisions of the Constitution, but in 2019 it was ejected from the text, which means that the Kharkiv agreements are now unconstitutional and all property, including the Black Sea Fleet, should be placed under Ukraine's control.
Illegal armed groups in temporarily occupied areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions started training minors to participate in military operations. Teenagers are not only brainwashed with a hostile attitude towards Ukraine, they are being educated on how to shoot from large-caliber weapons and Kalashnikov rifles. The prosecutor's office of the Donetsk region has initiated a pre-trial investigation into this fact. The investigation found out that since 2017, more than 100 minors in the age between 10 and 17 have been involved in the illegal activities through a network of the so-called patriotic clubs and military camps. Ukraine returns to adaptive quarantine. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal noted that the increased quarantine restrictions have significantly reduced the spread of infection. Just over 18,000 patients diagnosed with COVID-19 undergo treatment in hospitals now. The number is 10,000 less than in December. The Prime Minister instructed the Ministry of Health to determine as soon as possible the criteria by which districts and regions will be assigned to each of the quarantine zones.
Я попрошу Міністерство охорони здоров'я.
I will ask the Ministry of Health to actively approve possible changes to prevent any questions regarding the criteria by which one or another color for a certain region will be determined. At the same time, I emphasize on the responsibility of local authorities. They should not close eyes to violations of the quarantine, but carefully approach to health of citizens. Unfortunately, there are areas where we observe a slight increase in hospitalization.
Preparation for mass vaccination against COVID-19 started in the regions of the country. Specialized mobile brigades have already been formed. Who will be vaccinated the first and for free, and whether the points for vaccination are ready, our correspondents found out.
14 specialized mobile brigades have already been formed in Lviv region of Ukraine. Doctors will vaccinate local residents in separate temporary points, which will be organized in the premises of medical institutions. First of all, medical workers will be vaccinated, then the elderly and the military.
Certain instructions have been prepared and trainings were carried out. In addition, a list of medical workers have been formed. If necessary, they could be involved as a reserve. Vaccination will be carried out at healthcare institutions. We don't use stationary vaccination points to ensure that everyday vaccinations continue uninterrupted.
In Vinnytsia region, local residents will be vaccinated by 20 mobile brigades. The service will be available even for residents of the most distant village. To ensure this, family medicine cars are allocated.
All brigades have already been checked and are ready to work. Each one consists of 2 doctors. They are obliged to undergo appropriate vaccination courses. Each vaccine has its own instructions. We will start vaccinations in February. We expect vaccines in the second half of the month.
In Luhansk region, they plan to vaccinate more than 6,000 people during the first stage of mass vaccination against COVID-19. Doctors and the elderly who reside in specialized retirement homes will be the first to get the drug. While the storing conditions could not be kept on the appropriate level in the region, the vaccines will be brought from Kyiv, representatives of the Health Laboratory Center note.
It should be noted that the vaccination will be optional. No one is forced to do it. As of today, more than 75% of residents of the region have agreed to vaccinate. We will receive the vaccine that can be stored for up to 5 days at a temperature of +2 +4 degrees. And we will receive it in batches, each of them enough to cover some 3 or 5 days.
The number of mobile vaccination brigades is planned to double until May. Reported by Nick Starkov, Yulia Bil, Arina Kantanistova, Anastasia Volkova, UATV News.
The number of Ukrainians with oncology disease is increasing annually. More than 1 million patients are registered in cancer centers. Cancer control is a priority for the Ministry of Health. Therefore, a draft national strategy for the control of cancer until year 2030 has been developed. This will reduce morbidity and mortality through a nationwide systemic approach to the prevention, early detection and treatment of cancer.
Ми передбачили і оновлення матеріально-технічної бази.
We have foreseen the update of the material and technical base. The Ministry of Health has been working on an initiative such as managed entry agreements for over half a year. This is the new way to innovative treatment procedures. I hope that this will give our patients the opportunity to get the medicines they need, and our doctors will be given proper tools to deal with the disease. Forgetting Othello. This is a new performance in English staged at the ProEnglish Theater in Kyiv. The premiere will take place on February 13th. The action of the play takes place in the present day. The play raises the problem of refugees from Africa and Asia who seek to immigrate to Europe. About 90% of the text is taken from the classic drama by William Shakespeare, the director and actors say. Nevertheless, nothing from the plot was taken, only the names. Moreover, there is even no Othello in this interpretation of the classic tragedy.
Наша история не имеет тех временных рамок.
Our story doesn't have the time frame. In our story, everything happens here and now. And instead of the island of Othello, we have a concentration camp. A filter camp on the coast of Spain where immigration officers decide whether you get to Europe or not. The only thing is that these officers have the name Lago, Roderico Cassio. I think William Shakespeare will not be offended.
That's all for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned. More updates on our official website, YouTube and Facebook pages.